My name is Dr. Leah Hahn. Some of you I have known since my very first week in practice, like Jamie, and some of you I've just recently met. So it's fun to see so many faces and also some new faces here as well. So I just want to describe a little bit about our mission. We actually revisited our mission statement in the last couple years, and what we have created is what our goal is to really empower our community to create and sustain healthy lifestyle habits. And so we do that through many different modes. I mean, this is one of them though. Education is huge. And so you've got to really have a good understanding of your health and what options you have, and that information can then turn into action, and that's really what promotes change. So I will tell you, many of you know what my personal story is. I grew up with a mom that was very, very ill. She dealt with lupus. It is kind of lupus. She has lupus, Sjogren's disease, hypothyroidism, and rheumatoid arthritis. And so when I grew up in a very medical paradigm of my mom visiting medical doctor after medical doctor after medical doctor, lots and lots of specialists that put her on many, many different medications. And so what my family observed over the years was that despite all the medications that she was receiving, she was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Both Scott and I have our reasons of why we became chiropractors, and they're both very individual and unique to us. But what was really life-changing for me was that my mom finally was convinced to see a chiropractor, and the chiropractor actually didn't just look at her as a bunch of diagnoses. She looked at her as, what can I do to improve this person's well-being and their health? And that was a totally different experience for my family. And so what happened through that was my mom actually, the chiropractor said, you know, not only do you need to change your diet, you need to do a lot of other things to improve your level of health, but diet was a big one. And so what happened is the chiropractor actually said, you know, I really think that you cannot eat gluten. And that is probably the kind of core of why you're dealing with the health issues that you're dealing with. Well, I have a very Scandinavian family, and my mom would bake cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning. Do you think she really wanted to give that up? No, she did not. So she played around with eating gluten for years after that. But eventually the chiropractor really was able to work with her to an extent that she was ready to make those changes. And so eventually my mom was diagnosed as a full-blown celiac. That is why she has rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and Sjogren's disease and hypothyroidism. So what I want to give you today is some background and some information to figure out how food is affecting you, what you can do about it, and just some of this stuff. I hate telling you this. When you figure out these foods, these may be things that you have to avoid for the rest of your life. For other people, they're foods that they may be able to have occasionally and not create such a big problem. But my true intention of giving you this information is that I need you to have a really strong understanding, because that strong understanding is what's going to allow you to make long-term changes. So we'll start out. I'm going to go through this information. The last time I did this class, I think I kind of overwhelmed people, so I've tried to simplify it even more and give you some good handouts. But as we go through this, what I want to say is that most of the things that people have been taught about weight loss or health, the research no longer supports. And so what do you guys hear? I mean, a lot of people are here for weight loss. Some people are here for health. What do you guys hear about, in general, about what do you do to improve your health and lose weight? What are the foods that you should be consuming? Anybody? Participation is good. Yeah, what were you going to say, Christine? Fruits and vegetables, good. I like that. Anybody else? What do you guys see if you flip through a magazine? Milk. Milk ads. Milk does the body good. Sugar. Debunk that. Sugar. Oh, yes. Everything is made of sugar, isn't it? What else? What are we told, though, specifically? If you read magazines or you listen to the news, what are we told to do to lose weight?
Don't eat fat.
Don't eat fat. That's a huge message right there. Yeah, grains. Whole grains are really important. Yeah. Anything else that you guys hear consistently or read about?
No trans fats.
No trans fats. That's important. Okay, so these are some good things. You guys are generating all kinds of ideas, but what I will tell you just from looking at, if I look at regular media at all, what you'll see is we should drink low-fat milk, and we should eat whole grains, and we don't write these things down. These are not the things I want you to do. That maybe we should eat a lot of beans, or we should consume, your whole grains every single day. But what you look at for a lot of people when you're analyzing their health in this kind of a situation is that they lose the same 10 pounds over and over again because they gain it right back. Or they lose weight and they end up gaining even more weight in the long run. That's a really common cycle as well. And so again, if you look at I look at a lot of food journals, and I see a lot of salads, I see tofu, I see edamame, I see egg whites, I see a lot of low-fat dairy, yogurt, those types of foods, veggie burgers. And a lot of those things, when you look at that, are that if we really look at the research, and I'll explain that today, these foods aren't necessarily even healthy, but they're certainly not going to allow you to lose weight. And so today we're going to really talk about this whole process of identifying what will allow you to lose weight or what's going to change things for you. So the first thing I need you to understand is a really important concept, and that's the concept of a food intolerance. So when most people think of food issues, they're thinking of food allergies. Food allergies produce a very specific antibody in your body called IgE. This might be something important to write down. Now, when you go to a medical doctor and you say, I think I'm having some kind of a reaction to food, the toolbox that they have is looking at IgE antibodies. So IgE antibodies, well, if anyone's had them, they're like the skin tests. They do skin tests on people. They're looking for things that will produce like a rash, more of like what you would consider an anaphylactic shock kind of a reaction. Which is clearly, that's important to know if you really are concerned about that, like if you are concerned about a peanut allergy or a dairy allergy, something like that. But how you think of an IgE response is someone having their throat swelling, having trouble breathing, they might have, their tongue might swell, and they have developed like blotchy red patches all over their body. That's produced by an IgE antibody towards a food. What we're talking about tonight is something called IgG antibodies. IgG antibodies are what are created with food intolerance, which is more of an inflammatory type of reaction that happens within the body. So food intolerance versus a food allergy. Now, has anyone ever dealt with this or read about this before? Are you guys familiar with this concept? So Stan's very familiar. Anybody else that's dealt with this? Okay, so you saw them. I mean, we're starting to have more awareness as a culture about food intolerance. But when you think about that, I've got a lot of patients when we start looking at their health, and I'll explain some of the numbers that we're looking at and why we look at them, that I'm kind of starting to nudge them towards the thought process that, hey, there's something that you are consuming that is producing systemic inflammation for you. Now, the systemic inflammation, we're going to talk about what that looks like in the body and why that's such a bad thing. But they're producing this because they're eating a food consistently that's producing sometimes a low-level food intolerance response that, again, is producing inflammation within their body. And so when we think of something like that, the most difficult thing about that is that it can be kind of subtle. You might not realize that you had corn one day and then you don't sleep well for the next week because you had corn. Who's going to think that? That's an example. Or it could be that one of those things where you have maybe like tofu with the Whole Foods salad bar, and you gain 5 pounds over the next couple days, and you're like, what in the world? I haven't eaten anything that is that abnormal. Why am I gaining weight? Why am I putting on weight that quickly? But that soy, that may happen gradually over several days. So who's going to think, man, it was that tofu I ate at Whole Foods? Most people aren't going to think about that. So the other thing to remember about this is food intolerance. These kind of reactions can be genetic, but more in today's society, you're going to see that they are a result of today's lifestyle, and we'll talk about that. No one is at fault here, and I'm not pinpointing anyone saying, well, you just eat horribly and that's why you have food intolerance. It's not a situation like that. This is something that's more and more out of what's happening in the culture of food and how food is processed in our country, which is a really big bummer. But if we're educated people, we can make different decisions. So that's the good thing about it. So it can be, again, it can be genetic, but most likely it develops in life. It usually shows up sometimes as a kid, but most likely in the 20s and 30s, more likely in the mid-30s. And what we see in a situation like that, when you think about that, the most common cause of having food intolerance is stress. The other thing that makes it even worse, and we'll talk about how this happens, food intolerance, or stressful time period combined with sugar, antibiotics, stressful kind of situations or pollution in our environment, heavy metal exposure, that kind of a combination is what really does damage to the gut. So we're going to talk about how food intolerance actually develops in tonight's class. So when we figure out what happens again with food intolerance, we can either figure out, do we have to cut it out in the short term, which I mean like a 3 to 6 month time period, or is it something that we need to cut out for the rest of our lives? Bummer, but it's something that we've got to really figure that piece of it out. Some people have one food intolerance, some people have hundreds of food intolerances. Really depends on the exposure and what their body's some genetic predisposition to that as well. So if you have food intolerance, what are typical symptoms? Acid reflux, very common. Bloating, having indigestion, having constipation, having diarrhea. Those are the most common things. But it can also be things like headaches and migraines, having constantly clogged sinuses, allergy issues. It can show up as having fatigue and brain fog. Those are all in the spectrum of having food intolerances. So those are all things that we really want to start to recognize. But the other things that can happen is you are much more likely to gain weight. You're much more likely to have retention of fluid within your body. You're much more likely to have cellular damage, and that's really why I care so much about this, is that, and if our whole mission is to have people create healthy habits, we need you to be aware of what foods are causing you a problem, because diet is something that you can control on an everyday basis. It's one of the few things that we can control on an everyday basis, and so it's kind of exciting when you think about that there's actually something we can do here. So an example is someone might come to me and they're eating like a really low carb diet and they drink plenty of water and they're not really consuming a lot of sugar, which is wonderful. And we look at what's in a food journal, and every day they eat yogurt. Or every day they drink a diet soda. Or every day they have processed regular pretzels that they're consuming on a daily basis. And in their mind, they might think, well, this is only one time that I'm actually eating this. But if you think about what an IgG antibody does, once it's created within the body, it's going to create an inflammatory response over the next 3 days. And every time you eat it, your body's going to continue that inflammatory response. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to explore that even more. But these are questions I want you to really start to think about. Have you tried unsuccessfully to lose weight? Is what you used to use to lose weight no longer working for you, or the kind of diet that you're used to doing? Are you a yo-yo dieter? Do you have discomfort after eating? Do you feel bloated? Do you get constipated? Do you have diarrhea? These are signs. When people have those types of things going on, you would not believe the number of people that tell me, oh, it's not a big deal. I can deal with that. What they don't realize is that is a sign of a more serious process happening within the body. If we're going to get you healthy, I need you to pay attention to those kind of symptoms. So those are real common. So I've got some people that literally starve themselves and exercise like crazy and do not lose weight. There's usually something else happening within their body. Again, that inflammatory response. And have you gone through times of prolonged stress? I don't really know anyone who hasn't. So that's kind of a rule out for me. But at the same time, that again, high stress combined with sugar and a processed food diet, which doesn't that, I don't know, for a lot of Americans, doesn't that kind of go together? We get stressed and we don't really want to spend time cooking, or we maybe don't take as good a care of ourselves. So I see that for a lot of people. So those are things that we want to think about, and I've given you a checklist to really start to analyze that gives you some information, things that I want you to pay attention for in your body, and it gives you actually a scale. If you have so many symptoms, then start implementing now. If you have many, many symptoms, then we should have done it yesterday, but we're on a good track because we're doing it right now. So then we just get started with this ASAP. Okay. So there's a couple different things that we can do to figure this out. So what I'm doing tonight is I'm going to explain to you the hard way to do this. And I don't mean it in a hard way like you shouldn't try this. I'm saying that it is a way that takes a lot more commitment, but if you're really committed to doing it, you can be very successful with this. And there's like no cost involved, which is pretty cool. The other way that you can do it is you can actually do a food panel, an actual food allergy panel. There's one, and I'll talk to you guys about that at the end of the class. There's a way to do this that actually is done with a blood test. What we do is we have a company called Mile High Phlebotomy come into our office. They do a blood draw. They send the test into a company called Altest. And Altest runs a food allergy panel on 186 different foods and tests for IgG antibodies to those foods. You can imagine it's very effective in looking at that because you've got a lot of foods that you eat on a regular basis that could be causing a problem. So in my most complex cases, when we're not really sure where to go and someone seems to be eating a fairly healthy diet, that's something that we can always use as backup. So know that as I talk about this protocol tonight, if you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I could do this, then you're probably a blood draw candidate. And that's okay. I've got a lot of patients that do that. It's very, very effective. If you want to try to figure this out on your own, what I need you to do is start to follow the protocol that I'm going to talk about. And it's just, I can't really stress the importance of this enough. Because if you figure out that you are sensitive to something, like my mom, years down the road, by eating that food over and over and over again, it will create an inflammatory response in your body and show up in other ways of your health. So for her, again, it was that autoimmune spectrum. For some people, it's degenerative disc issues. For some people, it's osteoarthritis. For some people, it's osteoporosis. For other people, it's liver issues. It can be heart issues. So it will show up. And that's why we want to make these changes, and that's why I'm so passionate about, gosh, I just wanted people to understand that if you're sensitive to gluten, eating it every couple months and thinking that it's no big deal is a big deal. If you listen to Jack Wolfson when he was here this fall and spoke at our office, he's a very big promoter of everyone being off of gluten. He doesn't want anyone in the population to eat gluten because of the inflammatory effects of it. So it's when you think of this stuff, think of it as your general health and know that you can have a really good quality of life and eat really good food. You don't have to kind of live in that stressed out zone of eating foods that taste good but that make you feel really awful, because know that it is truly affecting your health. So how we do this is the most important part of the protocol that I could describe. I'm going to tell you what you need to cut out, but and just hold on for a minute and just take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. So the foods that we're going to cut out. We're going to cut out gluten. We're going to cut out soy. This is all in your handouts. We're going to cut out dairy, eggs, corn, peanuts, sugar, and artificial sweeteners. There's reasons we do this. We're going to talk about it. And I'm not an evil person, I promise. So just know it's going to be okay. So when we look at this, I will tell you, just from eliminating those foods, most people in a period of about 3 weeks will lose on average about 7 pounds. Now, weight loss is not really my primary goal here. As you know, that's just not our mission in general. There's reasons, my whole mission in this is that you get healthier through this process. So this is the deal. When you cut out these foods, what we are these are the most common offenders. If I were to tell you, after looking at 14 years of blood tests, these are the foods that I find in the blood tests over and over and over again that Americans react to. And we'll talk about why we react to them. But what you need to do is you need to cut out those foods completely for a 3-week time period. And that's the good news. This is not forever. I'm not telling you right at this point, at least, that this is forever. I'm telling you it's for a 3-week time period that you need to cut out those foods. The reason that is that your body will kill off IgG antibodies in a 3-week time period as long as your body is not exposed to those foods even once during that time period. So I'm asking you for a period of 3 weeks that you probably don't eat out, that you cook your food at home. Maybe do, like at our house, we do a lot of cooking on Sundays. It's the day to cook. We do a lot of prep that day so that it's easier to eat at home throughout the week, because I know everybody's busy. I know everybody has such a busy schedule in today's world. So you want to plan a time period where you can choose 3 weeks and really devote this to your health. And during that time period, you're going to have to do some meal planning. If you go to our website, Body and Balance Chiropractic, and you look on the top corner, there's a little Pinterest link or Pinterest icon that has, if you click on that, it will go to our Pinterest page, which is full of recipes that work with this. So you've got tons of options of food that you can use that actually is really good. It's all really good food, and it's stuff that you can actually enjoy eating. So that's something that we can do. So you're going to plan on cutting out these foods for a 3-week time period. Then what you are going to do is you're going to choose the first week, so week 4. You're going to choose a healthy form of the offending food and eat it once. So say the first week you decide to add back in eggs. You might prepare a hard-boiled egg or a scrambled egg, and you have that for breakfast, and then you do not eat eggs again for 3 days. So you keep eating all the good stuff. You're eating all the vegetables and the protein, all the things that I've given you in those handouts, and we'll talk more about what you do eat. But you only have that food once. You guys following me? And you wait 3 days. And the reason you wait 3 days is that's a delayed response reaction. So I want you to be looking for things like, do I have headaches? Do I have an eczema patch that breaks out? Do I have, am I more fatigued after I eat that egg? Do I have a loose stool? Do I get constipated? I want all of those, any kind of symptom, I want you to be journaling what you experience after eating that food. Is everyone following me with that? If you don't notice anything in that 3-day time period, you can go about eating eggs. You can add that back in. If you're anything like I was when I first did that, I was running to the bathroom and felt miserable and knew that I probably couldn't eat eggs for a long time. So it was very, very clear to me that that did not work. And so when you go through that, then what you would do is, so if you're in that camp where you can't have eggs, you're going to choose then for the next week that you're not consuming eggs, but then you're going to choose the next food that you're going to expose yourself to. So maybe that's dairy. So I want you to choose a healthy form of dairy and add that back in. And again, wait 3 days and watch to see what happens. If there are IgG antibodies to that food, you will notice it very, very quickly. If there's nothing, wait the 3 days. And if you don't notice anything, you're probably okay eating some dairy. But some dairy. We'll talk about that and why I'm not a big fan. So is that process making sense? You get to the point where you can actually test every group of food. And so the thing about that is that 3-week time period, by letting all those IgG antibodies die off, you're giving your gut a chance to heal. And we're going to talk about why that's so important. Gut healing is one of the most important things you can do. But the big thing to remember, and I think it really helps patients that I'm not telling them that immediately that they can't ever have eggs again, or they can't ever have dairy, or they can't ever have soy, whatever it may be, is that it's a 3-week time period. Or another additional week if that's a week that you're adding back in that food. So no cheating. That's what's going to allow the gut to heal. That's what's going to allow us to know if you have a response to that food or not. So does that process make sense? I would actually encourage people to go through that process about once a year. Because when we talk about leaky gut, which we're going to talk about here in a second, it is something that in today's world, it is something that we are all going to have to face. The research that's coming out on leaky gut, which we're going to start exploring is, and really talking about, is that at least 95% of the population has it. It's just expressing itself in different ways. So we really need to understand that piece of it. Go ahead, yeah.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
If you've been tested for celiac disease
Yeah.
and the result has been negative,
Mm-hmm.
should you still try to avoid the gluten in this process?
It would. And we'll talk about gluten specifically and why that would be. But when you think about all of that, the test for gluten is notoriously very, very poor. And so, and what they're doing now is they're telling patients, well, your blood test looked okay, you're fine. But it has about a 50% success rate of actually being correct. And so now they're doing more and more endoscopies, actually going in people to figure out what kind of gut damage they have. Yeah, most people don't want to go through that, but there's other reasons to avoid it than just that. There's also a test that Vibrant Lab performs that's called a wheat zoomer test that tests IgA antibodies, IgG antibodies. It looks at this whole profile. You can get a much better sense if you're actually can have it or not. So that's just something to keep in mind, but I think that test is like $199. It's not terribly expensive, but it can be life-changing for a patient to know actually what their autoimmune or what their immune response is to the food. So, good question. So I caution you, if you've had a gluten test and they're like, oh, you're fine, I wouldn't really count on that being completely accurate.
What did you say that other test was called?
It's called a wheat zoomer test is the name of the test. It's by Vibrant Labs. And it's just, it tests IgA antibodies, IgG antibodies. It looks at the whole inflammatory response to gluten specifically. So.
But it's only 50% reliable.
The medical test is. The one that they do in a doctor's office is only 50% reliable, but they don't do a real extensive panel. So they're just looking at one snapshot. Yeah. Okay, so with, as we go through this and the importance of, we really want to cut down on inflammation. So I think everybody knows that if you listen to the media, we all know that inflammation is the root of pretty much every disease that Americans are dealing with. So if we look at Alzheimer's, dementia, huge levels of increase right now in those diseases. If we look at diabetes, if we look at heart disease, all of these diseases have a root in inflammation as being the underlying cause of why people are developing these conditions. And so when we think about inflammation, there's a couple of different things that I want you to understand, is that inflammation, when you think about what happens on a cellular level, when someone has systemic inflammation, and I'll show you that's how we determine that, when someone is systemically inflamed, every single cell of their body is damaged. And that's hard to kind of think about, but when you think of every cell, and let me actually go to a slide of this so that you can see what we're looking at. Not a really fun drawing to look at. It's out of a textbook. It's not too exciting. But when you look at every single cell of the body has a cell membrane. It has a wall around it. And when cells become inflamed, that cell wall is damaged. The problem with that is that the cell wall is what allows every chemical messenger in the body to communicate from cell to cell to cell. So all of a sudden, now that we have this systemic inflammation, our cells aren't getting the right signaling, which can lead to things like cancer, which can lead to things like having, again, autoimmune conditions. It can lead to having really low energy and fatigue, our bodies being very toxic. And so when we look at this, there's a couple different things that are really important. So chemical messenger called leptin. Leptin got a lot of attention when it was discovered, but leptin is a hormone that helps you feel full. So if leptin can't bind onto your cellular receptor, you never feel full. You feel like you could eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until you're actually sick, because you just feel like you just are never satisfied. So again, that's a kind of a byproduct of having inflammation in the cells. Adiponectin is another hormone that helps you regulate your blood sugar, stabilize your blood sugar, and utilize fat. So if adiponectin can't bind to the cells, we gain weight. We have a higher fat mass percentage than we should. Insulin is another one. So we all have heard about insulin because diabetes is such a big issue. So our bodies produce more and more insulin. If the cells aren't responding to that insulin, we become insulin resistant. Our body has more and more issues storing sugar as fat, and our bodies, we actually become diabetic over time. Type 2 diabetes is the #1 disease on the rise in this country. So I am amazed at the number of people that come in and they look completely normal and completely healthy and have elevated blood sugar and are pre-diabetic. So it's really just a byproduct of today's world. So it's something that we really need to deal with. Some of the other things that happen, so cortisol. Is anyone familiar with cortisol? Stress hormone. So when we go through really stressful time periods in our life, we produce cortisol. And cortisol is when there's a lot of inflammation in our bodies. Cortisol is trying to bind onto the cells. But due to that inflammation, if it can't bind, the cells aren't responding to the cortisol. Well, if your cells don't respond to the cortisol, our body makes more cortisol. So now we just feel stressed. We feel stressed all the time. We don't maybe sleep well. We store more weight around our middle. And we also crave a lot of sugar and carbohydrates in that time period, which is really not fun. And so in these situations, if we don't deal with that inflammation, our bodies maintain this stress physiology 24/7. And so that's, again, where food comes in. If you're eating food that's stressing your body, you're producing more and more stress hormones to deal with that. So this is how we measure inflammation in our office. If you guys look at this, this is the circular picture that you see is a cell. And when we have a lot of toxicity within our body, which is represented by those little stars, we store toxicity within our cells, especially our fat cells. And so if your body is really toxic, more and more of the fluid and the nutrients that are in the cells leave the cell to go to all of the other tissues to try to dilute the toxicity and the inflammation. And so one of the ways that we can measure that is a test called bioimpedance analysis. And bioimpedance analysis actually helps us measure how much cellular fluid, how much fluid is in the cells and what's outside of the cells. And that can really help us determine then, I can start to have a conversation with someone, I think there's something that you're being exposed to that your body doesn't like. And so we can go through this kind of a protocol of really starting to determine what foods are affecting that person. Does that make sense? You look at that. So that's something I can tell you, a really fun, it's a kind of testimonial watching that. I had a patient that was doing our 8 Weeks to Wellness program, and she years ago had a food intolerance test. And so she brought in her blood work, and we looked at it, and really clearly on the page you could see that gluten was a problem from her blood work. And so she really didn't want to think that, because she really liked to eat gluten. She really likes to eat bread and pasta and, all kinds of baked things that she enjoys. But she had to cut it out. So she had to cut it out for this time period. And what was so neat to see, if you think of this in a weight loss perspective, is that she lost about 10 pounds initially from cutting out gluten. But then as time went on, her body started to heal. And so she was working out in our fitness center, and she started to gain muscle. And so in this process, after about the 10 pounds, she said, well, I'm just not really losing weight anymore. And we did the bioimpedance analysis, and we're watching, and we found that she had actually gained about 20 pounds of muscle, and she had lost about 30 pounds of fat. So it looked like she had lost 10 pounds, but her body composition had completely changed, but her inflammation started to clear. So over time, her numbers got better and better and better as the inflammation cleared from her body. So it's pretty fascinating to see, but that's the one that I'm looking at, is how much fluid is in the cells. That tells me a tremendous amount if someone is systemically inflamed or not. So questions about that process. I mean, does anyone think you can do it? Can you cut those foods out? We're going to talk more about that, but for 3 weeks. Can we do that? Getting hesitant? I don't know. Okay. It just takes planning, guys. I promise I'm here to support you. It just takes planning. You just have to plan really well, and I promise there's plenty of food that you can eat. So that's one thing. We got to talk more about how we're going to heal this. So the other picture that I wanted to show you, if you guys see this one, which one do you think is the healthy gut? We all have microbes in our gut, so don't mind those little green things. That we all have them. But which one looks like the healthy one? Okay, so the one on the left is the healthy one. The one on the right is what it looks like when people have leaky gut. Now, again, the research is pointing out that 95% of us have this. So that's going on in our bodies. So what leaky gut looks like when you think about this, we're eating those foods that are causing the inflammation. And all of our gut cells are bound together by what's called tight gap junctions. So they should look like this. They should look like the one on the left, where if you can see the little lines in between the cells, everything's real packed together and tight. But when we're eating these foods that are causing us problems, we start to develop spaces in between the gap junctions. And what happens then is these food particles can get into our bloodstream. Now our immune system says, hey, I don't want food particles in the immune system, I'm going to attack that. That's what the IgG antibody does. So the IgG antibodies go in, they attack those food particles, and they form what's called these little immune complexes. So think of this big mass of cells that's kind of floating around in the bloodstream, causing inflammation. Those masses of cells deposit themselves in joints, in organ systems, and that's how we develop many of the health issues that we have. I'm not saying that that's the only cause of health issues, but what the research is pointing to at this point is that it's a big cause of so many of our issues, is what's happening within our gut. So that's why healing the gut, why we think that that is such a big deal, and why it's really starting to gain so much attention in the media as well. So that's why I don't know if I've made that point. So is it we're cutting the foods out for 3 weeks? I guess I'm getting these glazed looks like, I don't know. Okay, yes, that's what we're doing. And then we're gradually, week by week, adding one of those food groups back in and waiting a 3-day time period. So maybe you're at the point where you are going to test gluten. You have it once, you wait 3 days, you see what happens. Just watch and journal. The other thing to remind you is that those IgG antibodies that your body's created to these foods are like living beings in your body. So they have cravings. They want more of that food. So if you have IgG antibodies to wheat, your body wants wheat. So when you go through this and you cut foods out for 3 weeks, I want you to pay attention to what you crave. It's not really you craving it, it's the antibodies craving it. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I need sugar so badly, can hardly stand myself, that's the antibodies craving the sugar. And I don't need anyone to test antibodies to sugar because we all have antibodies to sugar. So just so you know that, like, that's not one we really need to worry about. That one just needs to go away. So, unfortunately. So that's what the process looks like, and plan on it. If you get really good results doing this, plan on doing it once a year, because those food allergies and responses can change, and what your body produces antibodies to can change.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, Catherine, go ahead.
Doesn't your body need antibodies for these IgA and IgG? Don't they need them?
There is a healthy level of response, and we're looking for the ones that are the big ones, so the ones that are out of control. To a certain extent. So all of this is part of normal physiology. It's when we get into this leaky gut situation that it becomes abnormal. And so I hate to say that, I mean, the part of this that gets tough when you look at it is that if we look at how food is processed in our country, what you're going to see is that soy and corn are in just about everything, any kind of processed food. So that's why they're on the list of the 7 foods that you need to avoid, because it's the genetically modified process that's actually causing the leaky gut to happen. So you combine genetically modified food, and then you combine a high stress level, and you combine sugar, you combine heavy antibiotic exposure. All of those things are what then create the leaky gut. And that's why people start to react to so much of the food that they're eating. And it's really a tough situation because, you think of if you go to the grocery store, you really have to stay in the perimeter. I mean, you really need to be and we've all heard that for years. We all know that. It's just doing it. And I watch when I'm at the grocery store, what most people are buying is so disturbing. And I think that, we all hear what we should be eating so much on the news that it's like people just they don't even hear it. It's like, I don't know. It's a really tough situation that we're in right now. But I just remember even a couple weeks ago, I looked at this woman and she was very, very thin. And she actually looked fairly healthy. But it was white bread, a big gallon of milk, 2 big things of Diet Coke, and all packaged meals. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this, I don't know how this person is living. And of course they, again, they look okay. And that's what's so hard about this, is that when we talk about this, even from a weight loss perspective, we handle weight in different ways. I mean, for a situation like this, or if we go back to what's happening in an inflammatory response, our bodies handle things differently. So you could look at someone who's gained a lot of weight over the years and they have this issue, and you can look at this as also happening in someone who's very, very thin and they look okay because their genetics are a little different, that they can handle it, but it doesn't mean that the internal damage isn't happening. So it's hard. It's a tough one, but I think just the more we can educate people on what you can do about it, it can make a really big difference. Yeah.
On the leaky gut,
Yeah.
over what period of time, if at all, does the body correct itself?
Good question. So you can really depend on that it's going to take at least 6 months. And so I would say, though, for the majority of people, if you've had exposure to these things for a long time and had reactions for a long time, it can take many years. And that's the reality of it. I mean, it takes consistency, and we'll talk about that and what the things that you need to do, because it's not just all about avoiding foods, it's about adding the right nutrients in that can actually create healing. So there's a lot of things that we can do for that. But it is a process. When you think about like all the drugs and stuff that they're using for irritable bowel and constipation, and now they have like specific categories of constipation now, because they have different drugs for them. And there's just so much happening in the medical world with the gut, because this is autoimmune disease. We talk about diabetes being such on the rise, but the other one is autoimmune disease. If you look at the number one drugs that are being sold right now, the number of drugs that are being sold for autoimmune conditions just increases rapidly each year. And again, what's the common cause? Leaky gut is the root of autoimmune conditions. So that's why I guess I think it can make such a difference. Now, I'll tell you, in my own situation, Scott and I moved into a house in 2011, and we lived there for about 2 years when we had a day where we came home and there was a toilet leaking. And we have a house that was built in the 90s, and so we pulled back the carpet in the bathroom and found that there was mold all over the floor. And so then we went into working on the walls, and there was mold behind the walls. There was mold all over our attic. All of these things that had never been discovered in the inspection process. And one of the things that chronic mold exposure does causes leaky gut. So, you know, I've been there, and I've been when it's really, really bad, and it could be, I remember just eating just anything. I mean, we eat a very clean diet to begin with, but just eating anything put my gut in knots. It can heal. I'm a lot better now, but it took a lot of work to get there. So anything can heal in the body, just give it the right stuff. So let's talk about that, of what we can give the body in order to really start to heal. So I want you to start to really focus on the oils that you're consuming. So we talked about what we're cutting out, but now we need to talk about what we're going to make sure we put into the diet. Oils are a big category. So the processed oils that you see in most foods, like canola, soybean oil, what else do you guys see a lot of in processed foods? What else, you guys? Yeah, I mean, Crisco kind of fats, like those type of saturated fats. What else? Safflower, thank you. Safflower, sunflower, soybean oil. All of those types of fats become rancid very quickly. And because they're in just about every processed food that we consume in our country, Americans have a lot of those what are called omega-6 fats in their bloodstream. In fact, okay, so this will put it in perspective. I want you to focus on getting omega-3 oils into your body. And so those are going to be things like wild-caught fish, raw seeds and nuts, freshly ground flax seeds, olive oil, has some. Avocado oil is one of my favorites, coconut oil. But I want you to start to focus on getting those fats into your body. Now, if we're trying to lose weight, maybe about 2 teaspoons per meal. I don't want you to go crazy with adding a lot of fat into your diet, but you need some for sure. And the thing about this is that in our country, this will put it in perspective, the fats that I named that are in processed foods are those omega-6 oils. We don't want a lot of those in our body. In Europe, they have about 4 omega-6 oils to 1 omega-3 oil in their bodies, in their bloodstream. In our country, we have 39 omega-6 oils to 1 omega-3 oil. And that is basically inflammation right there. So we want to cut out a lot of those real processed oils, and we want to focus on, again, adding the right kind of fats into our diet. So even if like in the morning I'm making a smoothie, I might add a couple teaspoons of coconut oil into that smoothie. So that's something, I'm just always looking at each meal, how am I going to get some fat, some anti-inflammatory fats into that meal. So you avoid the damaged fats. That really in itself can help the cells heal over time. Another thing that you want to think about is completely getting rid of sugar, completely getting rid of artificial sweeteners and your high glycemic foods, because all of those foods increase insulin and raise your blood sugar. So when we talk about those, artificial sweeteners are going to be the big one that I will say you have to cut out if you're trying to heal the gut. It's been shown, you guys all know about probiotics and good gut flora. It's been shown that artificial sweeteners decrease that good gut flora by about 30%. So it's so not worth it to drink Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi or whatever it is that you're craving. You got to get rid of it. It's causing gut damage and inflammation on a daily basis for a lot of Americans. So that's something that's going to be really key. Yes, Ann? You can do honey in small amounts. I mean, so honey, there's so much good research coming out on honey having all these good properties to help out the gut flora. So again, it's some small amounts is okay. If we're trying to get rid of sugar cravings, cut it out during that time period, because it will still, your brain will say, oh, there's something sweet, I want more of that, even though it's a healthier resource. But gradually you can add it back in very small amounts. Other things, probiotics. So we've mentioned those. I would much rather have my patients taking a probiotic than I would eating yogurt each day. Because what else is in yogurt? Sugar and sometimes artificial sweeteners and all kinds of additives. So I pulled some of the ones that we use. Ultra Flora Balance is one that I use for people who just are gradually introducing probiotics back into their diet. And then a lot of patients use that long term. Free of gluten and dairy, very important. And then the other one that we do a lot of is the Innate 5014. This has 14 strains of bacteria and 50 billion bacteria per capsule. So that is a very strong probiotic, but very, very effective in rebuilding gut health. The other thing you want to do is think about, you want to eat foods that feed the good bacteria. So when you think about, if we go back to the gut picture and you see all these little organisms, we have all kinds of good bacteria that live in our gut, or we should, but we also have kind of some nasty kinds of bacteria that live within our gut. We want to feed the good bacteria and help them continue to populate. So how we do that is, again, we're going to supply the probiotics, but we're going to supply the kind of food that the probiotics love, which are called prebiotics. So prebiotic foods are things like garlic and onions, asparagus, dandelion greens are a really good source. Sauerkraut, pickled ginger, these might not be everyone's favorite things, but they are really good at feeding the bacteria. This is something that I take every single day that helps me a lot. It's called Colinex, and it's full of prebiotics. So it kind of tastes like bananas, but I will warn you, you do not let this sit. It will become a gelatinous kind of hard ball that you could throw at someone over time. So we don't want to do that. You don't want to try to gulp that down if it's become, if it's sat there for a long time. But it's something that, again, it's just full of prebiotics. So it's a great way to get a concentrated resource. I usually just stir that up and drink it first thing in the morning. So that is one thing that can also really feed and lead to really good gut health. We need to talk, are those things making sense? Are those things that we can do? Okay. I have a lot of patients who are dealing with gut health issues. We often start with detoxification. Many of you are familiar with the Ultra Clear Renew program that we put together of a detoxification. We do 10-day and also 30-day detoxification programs. It is a great way to get rid of cravings, but it also gives the gut a break. And when you give the gut a break and it's not constantly having to digest as much food as normal, it can really reset things and decrease the antibody load of those IgG antibodies. So those are some things we can do. We use different products for that. That's Ultra Clear Renew is one of them, but we also use GHI, and there's several different things that you can do. So a lot of that in the weight loss product, or the weight loss kind of a spectrum, I've given you a recipe for a shake that you can do. A gut healing shake. And so that's something that when we think about that is really, it kind of decreases calories in a way, but it gives the gut a break, and it can be very effective in that weight loss. So I usually have patients start out doing that twice a day when they're starting a gut healing protocol, and eventually we just do that once a day. So we don't do that forever. Questions on any of that stuff? And we'll keep moving forward. So the rest of it, I want to give you a little bit about a background. So again, you want to remember that as you're going through this anti-inflammatory diet, that whatever you crave, journal it. And so I want to, again, to just kind of have an understanding though of what's happening here. So as you go through this, if we talk about the different things here, is that gluten, the question many people have, why do I need to avoid gluten? So gluten is going to be wheat, barley, spelt, rye. Most oats are contaminated with gluten unless they say that they're gluten-free. But what happens with gluten, and for anybody, is that it disrupts and does some damage to the microvilli of the gut. The microvilli, we don't have an internal picture of the gut, but it kind of looks like, if you look at the inside lining of the gut, it looks like almost like a kind of a row of like shag carpeting is what microvilli look like, and that's what absorbs all of your nutrients. And so even when people don't have an outward reaction of gluten, reaction to it, if they've been consuming it for a long time, the gut actually becomes more and more damaged, and the more permeable the gut becomes, the less we absorb the nutrients that we're eating. And so that one's really important, but it also increases inflammation, but it causes the body to have a very hard time absorbing nutrients and also making B12. So you see a lot of B12 deficiencies in blood work that happen as people are eating gluten. Gluten also has something called a lectin, and lectins bind to the intestinal lining, and when they do this, it really alters your gut flora, and it causes you to store more calories as fat. So even if you're eating a low-calorie diet, you're converting more of that to fat when there's a lot of gluten that's contained in the diet. And so that's something that we always want to be aware of, and we want to be working on that process, at least for people, even if they don't think that they're reacting to it, if they go through this process, it's something that I want to be pretty much non-existent or very minimal in someone's diet for their overall health. About right now, and this was actually this study was from a couple years ago, they're estimating between 40 and 50% of the people in the United States are completely gluten intolerant. If you're from a Scandinavian country, you're much more likely to be, or if you're that's your heritage, you're much more likely to be affected by a gluten allergy or celiac disease. So it's kind of interesting when you look at it, different genetic dispositions to having some of these issues. But again, how heavily processed has gluten been? If you look at the history of wheat and how it's been modified over the years, the insecticides, the pesticides, you could blame a lot of what's happened to wheat on Roundup alone, as that causing so much of the gut permeability and leaky gut issues that people have. Well, that's a tough one. What I would really suggest are, as you cut these foods out, get used to having burgers with big things of wrapped lettuce around them. And you can try, if you really need that carb kind of a taste, even at Whole Foods, they make grain-free tortillas that actually really aren't that bad. I mean, they actually taste pretty good. So there's all kinds of products out there. We're really lucky that we have natural grocers and we have Whole Foods, and we have all of these resources that we can use to find foods that can really substitute what a piece of bread or a bun tastes like in a healthy way. The other thing I always have to just do a quick FYI on is that just because it says gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy. So again, if you were like my mom, her journey, she went from making the cinnamon rolls to then making the absolute most wonderful gluten-free cinnamon rolls that anyone's ever had, and now just not eating sugar at all. So it happened in layers. My mom had to really get to the point where gluten-free does not equal healthy. So we had to get there. And then she's a very paleo lifestyle kind of a person. So that has worked out very well for her and her health. So is that one making sense though? Does it make sense why the kind of path that gluten has been on and why it's become such a problem? Okay. Soy is the next one. Again, incredibly genetically modified. So if you find out even that soy does not cause you a problem, I'm going to highly encourage you that you always eat organic soy, because I don't want if it's organic, it can't be genetically modified. But soy is really an anti-nutrient, so it can really affect the absorption of minerals within your body, especially calcium and magnesium, copper, iron, zinc. So again, you can have small amounts of soy here and there if you don't react to it, if you go through the process and you're not reacting. If you are reacting, if you don't react at all, then again, we just go with the with organic. So, but look for it. I've given you a whole list of where soy hides because again, it's in everything. The one that you don't have to worry about as much is soy lecithin. That is a product that you're going to see in a lot of natural food. You're going to see that additive in a lot of natural food products. Soy lecithin does not have the soy protein, and it's the protein in the food that's actually causing the IgG reaction. So I don't worry as much about that. And then there's dairy. So when we talk about dairy, study after study, when they do long-term studies on dairy, what they're finding is that here's a 12-year study. It was the Nurses' Health Study, 77,000 women. The women who had the most milk on a daily basis were the ones that had the most osteoporotic fractures. So it's kind of, we've got to get that out of our head that milk is the best source of calcium. I would much rather having you eat spinach and dark leafy greens to fulfill your calcium needs than I would rather have you drink milk. So think about cutting that out. The other thing that they've shown is that milk is full of natural growth hormones. And so when you think about like insulin-like growth factors, the kids who drink the most milk, the kids who drink the most skim milk are the most likely to be obese. So it basically is causing our brains to produce more growth within our bodies when we're consuming a lot of dairy and not necessarily in a healthy way. So I'd much rather have you doing, I think of like coconut milk, I think of almond milk, there's hazelnut milk, there's just about every kind of milk you can imagine made from a nut. There's a lot of different resources out there. So try them and find ones that you like. We usually use almond and coconut milk at our house, and we use them for cooking and substitute them in recipes, no problem. So there's a lot of resources out there that can make a big difference for your health. The other piece of that, I always get a little bit of kickback from women thinking that if they're not drinking milk, they're not building bone health. Exercise and resistance exercise has been shown to be far more effective than milk. So move. We got to move. We got to get your body building strength. Makes a huge difference. And then we go to the eggs, the corn, the peanuts, and they each have some inflammatory process for some people, again. So eggs, I don't worry so much about organic eggs. If you find that you can tolerate eggs, that's a great thing because eggs make life so much easier. And that's something that as my gut healed, I was able to add eggs back in. But when you think about that, most eggs, if you buy regular eggs, conventional eggs that have been fed just in a feedlot, they've been fed, guess what? Corn and soy. Those are the two products that they're typically given, and that's why many people are reacting to eggs that didn't used to react to eggs. So it's more, again, of how they're raised, the processing. Support organic as much as you can, not only as for your own health, but we want you to support organic because that's what we want farmers to start to do. We want our dollars to start to speak for us politically of please use best practices, please use healthy practices that will keep our population healthier. And then we think about peanuts. So peanuts are highly contaminated with mold. That's the biggest issue for peanuts and why people have so many reactions to them. Really tough. I mean, if you've had chronic mold exposure like Scott and I have had, you really don't want to eat peanuts. But for the general population, they produce a toxic response. Think of how many kids now are reacting to peanuts that never did before. Again, it's more of the processing, but mold has been found to be the big issue with that. And then we look at sugar. And so sugar is the piece where all of us are allergic to it. Processed sugar was never meant to be in our bodies. Yes, it tastes good. It's the most addictive thing out there. It's more addictive than cocaine. And so if I could get rid of one thing for anybody, it would be sugar. And I promise, I will tell you, gosh, after 3 days of not eating sugar, you will feel great. You'll probably not crave it anymore. After 3 weeks of not having it, you really won't crave it anymore. And now you just have to do some environmental control and let people around you know that you're not eating sugar. But that is probably the most life-changing thing for people. is if we can get them off of sugar. So if you can use this protocol to your advantage and really figure things out and cut out the sugar permanently, there's no adding back of sugar, will make a huge difference for you. So that's the one that I would love, and I hope people are understanding the thing about artificial sweeteners as well. So same, and just think about this, like even if you have, say that you have artificial sweeteners in some soda, your brain still sees that as something sweet. You will want more sugar through the rest of your day just from consuming an artificial sweetener. So it's so not worth it, and it's so not worth what it does to the gut. So any questions on the protocol, what we're talking about of decreasing the inflammation within our body, healing the gut? Yeah, go ahead, Bernadette.
What about peanut butter?
Same thing. So switch if you can, like to almond butter. There's cashew butter, there's macadamia nut, but there's all kinds of different butters. Yes, they take a while to get used to, but it's a much better alternative for your body. Yeah. Especially people who have a lot of sinus issues, sinus congestion. If you think about that underlying mold exposure, we really don't want that. It can really create some serious congestion. So that's why it's worth trying. Almond butter.
Even the natural peanut butter?
Yes. Unfortunately, that's a tough one. Yeah, Catherine.
Are cashews a legume too?
They are when you look at that. So, we didn't talk about like cutting out all beans and that kind of thing. If you really want to test gluten, cut out grains. I mean, cashews too. I mean, so like a legume, like beans and all that. Yeah. I think it is. Peanuts are for sure. I don't know. I think cashews.
It's a seed
Thank you.
of the
So,
cashew apple.
oh, well, very nice. Thank you. Food expert. I like it.
I just learned that.
Oh, that's really cool. We got to share it here. Perfect. So, yeah, so cashew, then I wouldn't worry as much about a cashew, but I would really focus on peanuts. And, I will tell you, this is the positive of doing the blood work, because it's going to look at everything. It is extremely hard to do an elimination diet and try to figure out everything. But if you're concerned about the big food groups like the gluten, dairy, corn, soy, eggs, that type of thing, do this. Do this first. See what you can figure out on your own. But if you can't figure it out, then you've got the blood test as an option. Yeah.
Does insurance cover that blood test?
Usually not. They usually do not. I wish they did. I don't know what will change in our society for insurance companies to start to cover things that produce health. But right now they're really stuck in their model. They're very stuck in the disease model. And so what you're seeing is that they will cover if they're going to do an allergy test, if someone's like going to be life or death, which is your IgE. But IgG, they don't really like, oh, well, you're inflamed. So is the rest of the population. So they just look at it, unfortunately, very differently. So that's why we're just encouraging you to really take control of your health. Other questions that you guys have? Yeah.
If I understand everything, you go 3 weeks to get cleaned up,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that you start eating one of these foods.
Yep. 1 per week.
So therefore, there's 7 foods. This would be a 10-week.
It really is. If you go through the whole process of all of these foods, it's going to be 10 weeks. Now, the thing about that is, I shouldn't say that, because it's really going to look like probably about 7 weeks, because the corn and the peanuts and the sugar and the artificial sweeteners, we want you to just stay off of. So it's more of doing the testing with the dairy, the gluten. Does that make sense? The egg.
Or you could get the blood tests
Yeah.
and then wipe the whole thing out right off the bat.
Yeah, you could. You could.
Pay it up.
And the blood test costs $199.
Yeah, and actually, Elitas, the company that does this for us, is actually putting it. They have a special in February, so I wrote that up for you guys. So you've always got that in the background, because some people this can be really tough. The good news is about it for a lot of people is they're going to gain weight, gain weight. They're going to gain weight. They're going to lose weight. And so when you start to lose weight, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, this is really exciting. But know that is your for sure sign that you were having a reaction to one of these foods. So that's the positive about doing it for yourself. If you're doing it for weight loss, you can actually get some really good results doing this. But if you're doing it for more of the overall health and healing perspective, that's when you need to think about sticking to it long term.
Now, did I just understand that they're having a special on this in February?
They are. I will pass that out so you guys have that information.
$199 go down to?
That is the Wheat Zoomer test. The $199, that's the Wheat Zoomer test by Vibrant. So that one just stays at $199. I don't know that that company ever discounts it. The Ala test panel is usually $299, and that's marked down to $269 in February. So there's that option as well. Either way, I hope that what we got out of tonight was that we're eating healthier. Yes.
I understand your explanation on peanuts, and don't understand corn. As a
Oh, corn, we
vegetable,
didn't talk about it.
I just,
Corn is not a vegetable. So that's the bummer news that all of us learned about. I think that came out about 5 years ago. They started studying corn more extensively, and what they determined is corn is a grain. It's not a vegetable. Yeah, it's a bummer.
I love it, I crave it all the time.
Then we worry. See, that's our sign right there. We worry. Oh, do we have a reaction? We don't know. But when you look at that, so,
Put it in everything though.
okay. So corn, again, it's the pesticides that are used, it's the processing that's been used that has made corn, again, another food that's been highly contaminated with mold. How it's stored. Those of us from Minnesota, North Dakota, yes, we've seen a lot of that moldy corn in our lives. So, but yeah, so that's a tough one. We didn't, thank you for bringing that up because we didn't talk about it, but it's technically a grain. Yeah.
Is anybody growing organic corn?
They are, and you can buy organic corn. And again, if you're sensitive to it, you probably still can't have corn. But if you aren't sensitive to it, please buy organic corn.
Well, then why can't organic peanut butters,
Yeah,
is that not cutting out the mold, or?
unfortunately, not in the processing. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah. Yeah, Sherry.
Like multivitamins, do
Yeah.
supplements?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, with a leaky gut kind of a situation, what you think about is doing a lot more of your nutrients as liquid. So, and the reason that is because if your gut is inflamed and it's having issues getting nutrients in, you want to get things that are basically pre-digested. And that's why we recommend like the Ultra Clear Renew or the GHI that's out in the front, because they're nutrients that are anti-inflammatory to the gut. They're already pre-digested, so they're broken down. Your body can absorb those nutrients right away. It's getting the nutrient level, being able to heal the gut. So that's why, it's like probiotics. I understand that most people are going to do better with a capsule. It's not real fun to take a powdered probiotic and taste that. But it's really helpful when you can do some liquid nutrients like that. And so, yeah, that's one of the protocols that we can use. Yeah. Colonex, same kind of a thing, all pre-digested nutrients. Yeah, good question. Multivitamin, though, in general, like the dynamic greens, like I've got a lot of patients who would love to eat raw vegetables, but because they have so many gut issues, they can't. So I highly recommend eating steamed vegetables. If you've had chronic gut issues, go to steamed. You're still getting a very high nutrient value from that. You're okay buying frozen vegetables. It's a lot more cost effective and easier to keep things fresh. So that's one thing that you can do. But the other thing that I have a lot of these patients do is add in something like called dynamic greens, which is a green food. And that it just is like antioxidants right into the system. You can feel that rush of energy when you get that into your body. But again, there's no allergens in that. So that's, I shouldn't say, for some people with really bad gut destruction, they may still have food allergies to some vegetables, but for most people, they can tolerate some things like that, and it's a way to get the nutrients right into the body. Really good questions. Yeah, Catherine.
When you're talking about inflammation, you're mostly
Yeah.
talking about gut inflammation in this conversation.
Gut inflammation, but what it leads to when you think about that. So we talked about how the leaky gut then produces these immune complexes that escape through that barrier into the bloodstream and deposit themselves in different organs. So I'll give you an example. I had a patient that came in. He'd had blood work done, and he had elevated liver enzymes. And he's like, gosh, I have nothing else that's wrong with me. Why would my liver enzymes be elevated? And I looked at history, and it had things like he had itchy scalp, low energy, and elevated liver enzymes. So we look at it and I said, you know what, I want them to test for gluten. He did that. He was severely reacting to gluten, weirdly enough, and that by cutting that out, his gut was able to heal, his liver enzymes normalized, no more itchy scalp. So it can affect so many other things, and that's what people need to understand. Like for my mom, if she has a drop of gluten, a particle, inflammation cascade for 6 months. So that's why when I just always want people to understand, if we figure this out, you got to really plan on avoiding it for your health. It's just not worth it to say, oh, I'm just out to eat with friends, I'm going to have a little piece of bread. It's just not worth it for your health. So that's where we really get into this, like, and it, you know, and some people need a blood test to say, I need to see it. I need to see that I'm reacting to that, because just having acid reflux and constipation is not enough. I mean, for some people it isn't. They need to see it. Yeah, Terry.
So when someone comes in and sees you and you have us on the table and you work on us,
Yeah.
how do you as a chiropractor know where our inflammation is? And
Yeah.
'cause that always baffles me.
So this is, when you look at this piece of it, this is more of the systemic inflammation that I'm concerned about. So that is going to be more in the test. I mean, that's just more in a concrete test. You can, you know, from what we're used to feeling in people's bodies, you can feel different parts of the body. They're more inflamed. Different parts of the spine actually correspond to different organ systems. So if you can feel more inflammation around T11, T12, I kind of get a sense that adrenal health could be an issue. Stress levels, weight gain, cortisol issues, that's probably an issue that's affected. So there's that kind of connection, and often you can feel systemic inflammation in someone's tissue. But know that, you know, when you think about it, inflammation is part of a healing process as well. Inflammation is not all bad. We've been told in our culture that, oh, we have inflammation, take an Advil. There's part of inflammation where if you get rid of the inflammatory cascade too quickly, you do not heal as deeply or thoroughly. So inflammation, there's parts of it that are good.
So
It's when it's long lasting, it's bad.
does the manipulation or whatever,
The adjustments, yeah.
does that help repair the cells also?
It's a huge part of it. So one of the things that you have to see, that in order for someone to really regain their health, is their body needs to handle stress differently. And so that happens a lot with the adjustment process, which is very neurological. So there's that component of this happening. So when you think of, like, really, if you're gonna, and I'll explain this, so, and I'll give you a handout on this. When we're looking, this is called a wellness score, and then you look at something like this, we are looking at several different factors. Some are how people move. You know, if when you think of arthritis issues, osteoarthritis, degenerative disc issues, that is an inflammatory condition. That's it's at the root of it. So we're looking at how someone moves, but we're also, so we've got that intracellular water factor. I am monitoring that for people. Is their inflammation improving? And that takes consistency, and it takes work with their diet and their stress. But then we're looking at some other factors. Waist circumference. You know, when we store more weight in our bellies, that's a lot of inflammation. So that's where diet changes pay off tremendously when you get rid of, like, so maybe corn is the issue. I'm sorry to tell, maybe it may not be. But if maybe corn is the issue, so we cut that out of the diet, and wow, inches start to shrink off the belly because we're getting rid of that inflammatory food for that person. So those are all the factors that we look at in an exam process, and there's several, and the reds indicate that those areas are not good. Those are the red areas indicate that that person needs to take some serious action on those parameters. So that's what we're monitoring, and that's what we're watching as people go through our processes, so we can actually measure, is inflammation getting better? Is this person getting healthier? Because I want them to look better, I want them to feel better, and we do that through a series of things. So when you think about our mission, when we moved over into this space, we used to be across the street, we just did chiropractic. And so we moved over into this space, and we were still just doing chiropractic, and we got awesome changes with that, and people had less pain, and they did get healthier. But what we found is that I've taught these classes for years, and when I would get feedback on these classes, I would say, well, you know, what did you do? Well, I learned a lot, and I drink more water. but no change. And so that's where we started to implement. We went from chiropractic, which is we do a very specific form of chiropractic that's very gentle. But we do a lot of work with mindfulness. So you'll see in this upcoming year, we're going to do more and more classes on mindfulness. How do you incorporate meditation? How do you incorporate gratitude? How do you incorporate living a more present, being in present time consciousness? How do you incorporate that more into your life? So that is a huge portion of what we do. We do a lot of nutritional work. I got to figure out where someone's at and what they're doing. This is a huge step. If you want to do some work before you even see me, this is a place to start. And then we have the massage component, and not just for that it's relaxing, that it's therapeutic and what it delivers. And then we have our functional fitness center. So that's why we expanded over into the space next to us, and that has the functional fitness center. You know, we do group personalized training. So all of these people are doing individualized workouts that are custom for their body and their specific needs, all doctor directed, but that's what really produces the change. And so many of you know Jim, and he loves to be in these photos. So I got to make sure that, tribute to Jim, he's the one that's putting all those articles in the newspaper for us, and such a proponent of the 8 Weeks to Wellness program, but that's Jim and his wife. So, I mean, that's kind of the mission of what we do, but the whole wellness score process is what allows us to customize that for people. That's what allows us to figure out what someone's strengths and weaknesses are, and if they're trying to lose weight, they're trying to lose weight and get healthy, then we've got to customize that program for them. So I will pass this out. I put together, so you guys would see it, I've got a lot of handouts on how to do this protocol. So you've got some support. So if you go home and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, read over your handouts, but we're here for questions. So if you want to call and you want to leave me a message, and I can try to return that call as soon as possible, but it gives you some information. I'm going to pass some of these out. So if you want to know more about your health, if you want to know more about what's happening in your body, get your wellness score done. But if you want to really tackle this stuff and you feel like you need support, we're here for you. And that's the kind of stuff we've had to do it for ourselves. We've taken many, many seminars on gut health and inflammation alone. But you just want to, if you need that support, then do something, take action with that. I will tell you that the thing I see with our patients is that procrastination is the absolute thief of health. It just, when people think that they want something to change and they don't take action on it, it really doesn't really get any better. And they have other health issues that start to develop. So do something. And so talk to us about that if you want more information.